My manager stole my presentation and took a six-figure bonus. I set a logic bomb in the data that only I can fix. My name is Rose Calder and I am 60 years old. I stood at the very back of the grand auditorium, my hands shaking inside my blazer pockets. On the stage, my manager Julian was soaking up the spotlight. He was presenting the logistics data ecosystem I had spent 6 grueling months building. My eyes burned as I watched him click through my slides, using my words and my research. When he finished, the global board members stood up. The sound of their clapping felt like thunder hitting my chest. Then, the CEO stepped forward with a giant check for $150,000. The innovation bonus goes to Julian for saving this company, she announced. Julian beamed, looking like a hero. As he walked off the stage, he caught my eye in the back. He didn't look guilty. He just winked at me and mouthed 3 words that made my blood run cold. Team effort, kid. I felt like I was disappearing. Later that afternoon, the office was quiet, but my heart was racing. I walked into Julian's glass office and stood by his desk. I asked him why my name wasn't on the bonus check or the presentation. Julian didn't even look up from his phone. He laughed, a dry sound that made me feel small. Rose, you're too senior to be so naive, he said. You're just a support staffer. You're too junior in spirit for the big credit. He reached into his drawer and tossed a $50 Starbucks gift card onto the desk. The bonus is staying in my pocket, but enjoy some lattes on me. I felt a hot surge of anger in my throat. I walked back to my desk to look at our shared drive. My heart stopped. My name had been scrubbed from every single digital file. I was a ghost in my own work. I was standing by the printer, trying to breathe, when Sarah, Julian's young executive assistant, grabbed my arm. She pulled me into the dark supply closet and shut the door. There had always been a strange heat between us, a weird tension I couldn't explain. Before I could speak, she leaned in and kissed me breathlessly. It was sudden and desperate. Rose, just let it go, she whispered against my ear. Don't fight him. Just stay quiet and enjoy the ride with us. Julian takes care of people who follow the rules. I felt confused and lightheaded, but then I felt something hard in her blazer pocket. I reached down and touched it. It was Julian's private, encrypted hardware token, the only key to his personal files. Subscribe for more revenge stories to see what Rose does next. I pulled back, realizing she was trying to distract me from the truth. I went home to my quiet apartment and opened my private laptop. The room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of the screen. Julian thought I had just given him a simple presentation, but he was wrong. I was 60 years old, and I had learned a few tricks he couldn't imagine. I hadn't just handed over slides, I had handed over a live, breathing data ecosystem. The company's entire global logistics chain was now running on my heartbeat. They were using my formulas to track every ship, plane, and truck in the world. I looked at the hidden backdoor I had built into the software months ago. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. I wasn't just a support staffer. I was the architect of their entire world. I typed a single, final command into the dark terminal, start_timer, 45_days. I sat back and watched the cursor blink. It was time to explain what I had done. I had planted a logic bomb deep inside the server. To any normal coder, it looked like a perfect, beautiful piece of math. It didn't look like a virus or a bug. It looked like efficiency. But a logic bomb is a piece of code that stays silent until a specific condition is met. My condition was simple and cruel. I programmed the system to monitor the company's total revenue. When the profits hit a record peak, the moment Julian would be celebrating the most, the math would slowly start to change. It wouldn't crash the system immediately. Instead, the numbers would start to hallucinate. Small errors would grow into giant disasters. I closed my laptop and felt a cold peace wash over me. The fuse was lit, and the clock was ticking. The following Monday, I walked into the office expecting a quiet day of planning. Instead, I found Julian standing in the center of the department with his nephew, Marcus. Marcus was barely 25 and spent most of his time watching sports at his desk. Attention everyone, Julian announced, his voice booming with fake pride. Marcus is our new senior director of analytics. My jaw dropped. That was the position Julian had promised me for 3 years. Julian looked at me with a cold, plastic smile. He told me that my new job was to maintain the system I built while Marcus took the corner office. If the system crashes, Rose, it's on your head, Julian warned me in front of everyone. But if it thrives and makes us billions, it's a testament to my genius and Marcus's leadership. I nodded slowly, feeling the sting of the insult. I went back to my cubicle, knowing that Julian had just handed me the shovel to dig his own grave. Sarah invited me over to her apartment that night, claiming she wanted to apologize for the closet incident. The air in her place was thick with expensive perfume and high tension. She poured me wine and acted like we were best friends, but I remained focused. I knew she was Julian's eyes and ears. When she went into the bathroom to take a shower, I moved like a shadow. I found her bag on the kitchen counter. I took out Julian's hardware token and used a small device I had hidden in my sleeve to clone the digital signature. My hands were steady as I worked. Just as I finished, her phone lit up with a text from Julian. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart drop. It said, "Did you get her to sign the IP waiver yet? We need to own her brain before the merger." I realized then that their intimacy was just a trap to steal my life's work. The next morning, Julian called me into his office. He looked smug as he pushed a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me. It was a legal waiver stating that all my past inventions, current ideas, and future thoughts belonged to Julian personally, not even the company. "It's just standard procedure for the new structure, Rose," he lied, leaning back in his leather chair. "Sign it, and we can all move forward as a happy team." I looked him in the eye and picked up the pen. I knew he hadn't read the fine print of the system I built. As I signed my name in loopy, elegant cursive, I used a special ink that formed a microscopic QR code within the signature. That code didn't lead to a website. It led to a hidden, private server where I was logging every single one of Julian's lies. He snatched the paper away, thinking he had won. A few days later, the pressure began to mount. A high-level investor group arrived at the office, demanding to hear about the next phase of our data strategy. Julian stood at the front of the conference room, looking confident. However, without my detailed notes and secret explanations, he started to struggle. He tried to explain the complex algorithms I had written, but he sounded like a complete idiot. He stumbled over basic terms and looked toward me for help. I just sat there with a blank expression, sipping my lukewarm tea. I didn't offer a single word. The investors began to whisper among themselves, looking concerned. Julian's face turned a deep, angry shade of red. Subscribe now for more revenge stories to see how the genius falls apart. After the meeting, he cornered me in the break room and threatened to fire me unless I wrote a full cheat sheet for him by tomorrow morning. I stayed up all night, but I didn't write a real cheat sheet. Instead, I filled 10 pages with deep learning buzzwords and nonsense technical jargon that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing. I used words like quantum synergy and neural optimization in sentences that were grammatically correct but logically empty. I handed it to him the next morning with a tired, fake smile. Julian didn't even read it carefully. He just glanced at the headings and smirked.
"See?
"I knew you'd fall in line," he said, patting me on the shoulder like a disobedient pet. He took those notes straight to the board of directors and presented them as his own visionary strategy. They were so blinded by his charisma and the current profits that they actually bought it. He was digging his own grave deeper with every fake word he spoke, and I was happy to provide the dirt. On the 20th day, the first tiny crack appeared in Julian's perfect world. I was sitting at my desk when a frantic notification popped up on the global monitor. A minor shipping warehouse in Belgium was reporting a massive system error. According to the data, their inventory count for shipping containers had suddenly jumped to infinity. It was a mathematical impossibility that should have stopped everything. I watched Julian walk over to the monitor, his brow furrowed in confusion. He stared at the screen for a moment, then let out a loud, forced laugh to calm the junior staff around him. "It is just a reboot issue," he announced dismissively, waving his hand as if he could make the error vanish. He didn't realize that the infinity glitch was the first sign of the hallucination I had planted. He ignored the warning, too arrogant to admit he didn't understand the system he claimed to own. Instead of fixing the problem, Julian went on the attack. That afternoon, he called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. I was forced to stand against the wall while he paced the room, pointing his finger at me. "Rose is attempting to sabotage the system because she is jealous of my innovation bonus," he lied, his voice thick with fake concern. He told the board that I was bitter and had become a liability to the company's future. The Ice Queen's CEO, Clara, watched me with cold, unreadable eyes. Julian demanded that I be removed from the project immediately to protect the integrity of the data. To my horror, the board agreed. I was placed on internal investigation, effective immediately. 2 security guards were called to my cubicle, and I was publicly escorted from the building like a common criminal. Julian watched from his glass office, winking at me as the elevator doors closed. I spent the next 2 weeks sitting in a small coffee shop across the street from the office tower. I wore a simple coat and kept my head down, watching the world I built from the outside. I monitored the company's stock price on my phone, watching the green line climb higher and higher every day. The public was in love with the Julian method. The higher the stock went, the closer the logic bomb got to its final explosion. One rainy evening, I looked through the window of a fancy restaurant next to the cafe. I saw Sarah and Julian sitting at a corner table. They were clinking glasses of expensive champagne, laughing and touching hands. They looked like the perfect power couple, celebrating the life they had stolen from an older woman they thought was too weak to fight back. I sipped my bitter black coffee and whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The true depth of the betrayal hit me a few hours later. I used the cloned hardware token to log into Sarah's private cloud storage from my laptop. I found a folder labeled with my name. Inside were hundreds of recordings and photos from the past 6 months. I realized that Sarah had never been interested in me at all. She had been Julian's mistress for years. They had used her to manage me, using intimacy and fake friendship to keep me compliant and focused on the work. They joked about my loneliness in their private texts, mocking me for believing that someone as young and beautiful as Sarah could ever care for a woman my age. They didn't just steal my research and my bonus, they had tried to steal my very dignity. My grief finally burned away, leaving only a hard, white-hot coal of rage in my chest. It was now day 40. The company hit record-breaking profits, and the news was everywhere. The CEO, Clara, appeared on television to announce a multi-billion-dollar merger with a global tech giant. The entire deal was based on the unfailing accuracy of my data ecosystem. Julian was being hailed as the greatest mind in logistics history. He was scheduled to sign the final merger papers in 5 days, which would trigger a massive payout for him and his nephew. I sat in my dark apartment, the only light coming from the ticking digital clock on my wall. I had been silent for weeks, letting them believe they had truly won. I looked at the countdown timer on my secondary screen. 5 days to go, I whispered to the empty room. Hit subscribe for more revenge stories to see the final meltdown. The trap was set, and there was no way out. Day 45 arrived with a chilling silence. I sat in my apartment, watching the master server logs on my private screen. The hallucination began at exactly 9 a.m. It started deep in the core processing unit. In my system, 1 plus 1 no longer equaled 2. It equaled 2.00000001. To a human, that tiny decimal seems like nothing. But to a high-frequency trading algorithm and a global logistics grid, it was a lethal poison. Within minutes, the rounding errors began to compound. Thousands of shipping orders started drifting. A truck in New York was told it was carrying 1 billion tons of coal. A ship in Singapore was told its destination didn't exist. The data was quietly eating itself from the inside out. It was a beautiful, mathematical disaster. I watched the first red warning lights blink on my dashboard, knowing that in the office tower across town, the world was about to catch fire. My phone exploded at 3 a.m. the next morning. It was Julian. I let it ring 5 times before I picked up. He wasn't the smug, calm man I remembered. He was screaming so loud I had to move the phone away from my ear. "Rose, what did you do? The numbers are drifting." The whole European grid just went dark. His voice was high and panicked, the sound of a man who realized his genius was a hollow shell. He demanded that I come into the office immediately to fix the glitch. I stayed silent for a long moment, listening to him beg and threaten me in the same breath. "I'm sorry, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "But remember? You told the board I was sabotaging the system. You told them I was a liability. Why would you want a liability touching your masterpiece?" I hung up and turned my phone off. I didn't expect what happened next. 2 hours later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside my favorite dive bar, where I was having a quiet breakfast. The Ice Queen herself, Clara the CEO, stepped out. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharper than ever. She sat down across from me without being invited. She didn't scream like Julian. She just looked at the terminal screen on my laptop, which was still scrolling with red error codes. "How long have you been planning this, Rose?" she asked quietly. She didn't sound angry. She sounded impressed. I told her the truth, that I had built the system to protect itself from frauds. Clara knew Julian was a fake. She had always known. But now the multi-billion-dollar merger was falling apart, and she was the one holding the bill. "I need that system back, Rose," she whispered. Clara was a shark, but I was the one with the teeth now. She told me that Julian was finished, regardless of what happened. The board was already drafting his termination papers. She offered me Julian's job on the spot, the title, the corner office, and a salary that would make my previous one look like pocket change. She thought that was what I wanted. She thought I was just another person looking for a promotion. I looked at her and shook my head. I don't want his job, Clara, I said, leaning forward until our faces were inches apart. I want his life. I want him to feel the same weight of the disappearing world that he tried to force on me. I told her I would fix the system, but only on my terms. I wanted total control and a public confession. Subscribe for more revenge stories to see the deal. While we sat in that booth, the logic bomb went full scale. It was no longer a drift, it was a total system crash. The company's global logistics didn't just slow down, they stopped. Planes were grounded on runways because their fuel levels were reporting as imaginary numbers. Giant cargo ships were stuck in the middle of the ocean because their navigation maps turned into static. The company was losing $10 million per hour, and the news was starting to report a global supply chain crisis. The stock price, which had been at an all-time high, began to plummet like a stone in a well. Julian was at the office, surrounded by technicians who couldn't find the ghost in the machine. He was sweating through his expensive suit, watching his entire future vanish into a sea of red computer code. He was finally seeing the infinity he ignored. By the next afternoon, Julian was desperate. Instead of taking responsibility, he tried one last, pathetic play. He called a press conference in the lobby of the building, standing before a dozen cameras and microphones. With a shaky voice, he claimed that I was a disgruntled former employee who had hacked the system out of spite. He called me a criminal and a danger to the industry. I sat in the back of the room, wearing a simple hat and sunglasses, watching him lie to the world. But I was ready for this. The moment he finished his speech, I hit send on an anonymous email to every major news outlet. It contained a hidden screen recording video of Julian himself authorizing the very lines of code that caused the crash. I had recorded him months ago when he was too busy bragging to notice what he was signing. The reporters' phones began to buzz instantly. I returned to my apartment to find Sarah waiting by my door. She was crying, her makeup smeared, looking nothing like the confident mistress I had seen in the restaurant. She tried to push her way inside, offering me anything to make the evidence against her disappear. She confessed that Julian had promised her a house from the bonus money he stole from me. "Please, Rose, don't ruin me," she begged, clutching my sleeve. "I was just doing what he told me." I looked at her and felt a strange sense of pity, but no mercy. I pulled my arm away and opened my phone. I hit record and let her ramble until she had fully confessed that Julian had systematically stolen my work and planned the fraud. Once I had the recording, I reached into my bag. I handed her the $50 Starbucks gift card Julian had given me. "Team effort, Sarah," I said, and closed the door. The following morning was the final boardroom showdown. The air in the room was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and pure panic. The board of directors sat in stony silence as Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table. He was trying to explain the glitch using the nonsense buzzwords I had given him in the fake cheat sheet. He looked like a man drowning in his own lies. "We just need to optimize the quantum synergy," he stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. The CEO, Clara, looked like she wanted to kill him. Suddenly, the heavy double doors swung open. I walked in, dressed in my best suit, holding my laptop. The room went dead silent. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open like a fish. He looked at me with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated hatred. The board members didn't care about Julian anymore. They turned to me like I was a savior. "Fix it, Rose," one of them pleaded. "Fix it in 1 hour, or this company goes bankrupt by noon." They explained that the merger would be cancelled and thousands of people would lose their jobs if the ships and planes didn't move by lunch. I didn't move toward the computer. I just stood there, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed. "I can fix it in 60 seconds, I said calmly. A sigh of relief went through the room, but I wasn't finished. "But before I touch a single key, I need something from Julian." I looked directly at him. "I need Julian Ross to handwrite his official resignation, admitting to the theft of my intellectual property, right here in front of everyone." Subscribe for more revenge stories to see the final fall. Julian let out a short, hysterical laugh. He thought he could outsmart me one last time. He grabbed a piece of company letterhead and a pen, scribbling a quick resignation. He thought he could just claim he was under duress later and rescind the whole thing once the system was back up. He signed it with a flourish and slammed the paper onto the table.
There. Happy now? Fix the damn machines, he barked.
He didn't realize that the logic bomb wasn't just in the logistics code. I had integrated the company's internal communications into the trigger. The very second his signature hit the digital scanner on the table, my script activated. The resignation wasn't just a piece of paper. It was automatically posted to LinkedIn, Twitter, the SEC, and the company's internal Slack channel. Within seconds, the entire professional world knew Julian was a fraud. The board members stared at their phones as the notifications chimed in unison. Julian's face turned from pale to a ghostly white. He realized his quick fix was now a permanent public record. I didn't rush to my laptop. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a physical hardware key, the one I had modeled after the digital signature I cloned from Sarah. I don't need to type a single line of code, I told the room. I walked to the main terminal at the head of the table and slotted the physical key into the port. This was the master key the system had been waiting for. I pressed one single button. On the giant monitors lining the walls, the red error codes vanished. The infinity symbols turned back into real, manageable numbers. The system repaired itself in exactly 60 seconds, and the global logistics chain hummed back to life. I felt the power of the room shift entirely toward me. Clara, the CEO, didn't waste a second. She signaled to the head of finance who was sitting at the far end of the table. The board has reached a decision, Clara said, her voice cutting through the remaining tension like a knife. She looked at Julian, who was still slumped in his chair. Because your resignation includes an admission of intellectual property theft, your bonus is void. I watched the screen on the wall as a bank transfer was initiated. The $150,000 innovation bonus was clawed back from Julian's account in real time. But they weren't done. Clara announced that as a consulting fee for saving the company from total collapse, they were transferring $500,000 to my private account immediately. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen and saw the balance. It was more money than I had earned in the last 10 years combined. Julian let out a low, broken groan. The room was still buzzing when the heavy double doors opened for the second time. This time, it wasn't a savior who walked in. 2 police officers and an investigator from the SEC entered the room. My logic bomb had done more than just scramble the logistics data. While it was hallucinating, it had been forced to scan every deep-level financial file to find a logic match. In doing so, it had uncovered Julian's separate embezzlement scheme. He had been skimming small amounts from the warehouse budgets for years. I had compiled all the evidence into a neat, encrypted folder that was sent to the authorities the moment the system rebooted. The lead officer walked straight to the head of the table. Julian Ross, you are under arrest for corporate fraud and embezzlement, he said. Julian was handcuffed right there in the boardroom, his expensive suit sleeves wrinkling as they pulled his arms back. As the police led Julian away, Sarah was waiting in the hallway, likely hoping to slip away unnoticed. But her name was all over the embezzlement files too. She had helped him hide the money in offshore accounts. The guards blocked her path. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror, begging for a word of support. I remembered the way she mocked my loneliness in those private texts. I walked up to her, calm and steady. She started to sob, asking what she was supposed to do now that she was fired and blacklisted from the industry. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out the $50 Starbucks gift card one last time, and tucked it into her shaking hand. Team effort, I whispered, echoing the very words they used to destroy me. I watched the security team escort her out of the building. She was officially a ghost. The merger went through the following week, but it didn't happen the way Julian had planned. I was the one sitting across from the global investors now. I negotiated the terms, and I made sure my name was on every single document. By the time the ink was dry, I was named the youngest CTO in the company's history, not by age, but by the sheer speed of my rise to the top. I moved into the corner office, the one Julian had bragged about. As I was clearing out his old files, I found a birth certificate tucked in the back of a drawer. I looked at the names and froze. Marcus, the nephew Julian had promoted over me, wasn't his nephew at all. He was Julian's secret son from an affair 25 years ago. Subscribe for more revenge stories to see how Rose handles the final fallout. The web of lies was even deeper than I thought. 2 months after the arrest, Julian tried one last desperate move from his jail cell. He hired a high-priced lawyer and filed a massive lawsuit against me personally. He claimed that the logic bomb was a malicious attack on company property and that I had hacked his original work. The courtroom was packed with reporters when the judge made his ruling. I sat at the defense table, calm and composed, while Julian's lawyer ranted about my illegal code. However, the judge looked down at the documents Julian had signed months earlier. "Mr. Ross," the judge said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You signed a sworn statement claiming that this code was entirely your own genius. You claimed every line of it belonged to you." He paused, looking at Julian with pure disdain. "Therefore, the court rules that you technically bombed yourself. You cannot sue someone for a flaw in work you claim to have created." The lawsuit was dismissed. Once the legal dust settled, I returned to the office and accessed the deepest parts of the master server. I found a hidden, password-protected folder in Julian's old directory labeled the Black Book. My heart ached as I opened it. It was a digital list of every employee Julian had stepped on, cheated, or silenced over the last decade. There were dozens of names, talented women who were pushed out, older men who were denied pensions, and interns whose ideas were stolen. Julian had kept it as a trophy room of his conquests. I didn't delete the file. Instead, I launched the restoration program. I used my new power as CTO to track down every person on that list. I offered them their jobs back, provided them with back pay settlements, and cleared their professional reputations. I turned Julian's Hall of Shame into a foundation for a company that finally had a soul. A few months later, a famous documentary crew arrived at the office to film a special about the great tech fraud. They interviewed the board, the investors, and even managed to get a grainy video call with Julian from federal prison. He looked terrible. His hair had gone gray, and the arrogance was finally gone from his eyes. The documentary ended with a shot of the Innovator of the Year gala. I was standing on the stage in a beautiful navy gown, holding a gold trophy. I looked into the camera and spoke about the importance of integrity in the digital age. In his cell, Julian watched me on a tiny, flickering television screen. He saw the woman he called Junior receiving a standing ovation from the entire industry. He realized that while he was chasing a bonus, I was building a legacy. He had nothing left but the four walls of his cell. One evening, Clara, the Ice Queen CEO, invited me to her private balcony for a drink. We looked out over the city lights, the office tower glowing in the distance. "I have a confession, Rose," she said, her voice unusually soft. She admitted that she had known Julian was a fraud for at least 3 years. "I needed him to keep the numbers up while I looked for a replacement," she explained. "But I needed a catalyst. I needed someone like you to finally clean house so I could get rid of him without a lawsuit." I realized then that in the corporate world, everyone is playing a game. She had used my anger to do her dirty work, just as Julian had used my brain to get his bonus. "You're a shark, Clara," I told her. She laughed and offered me a seat on the global board. "And you, Rose, are the ocean." A year passed, and I was sitting in my office when my assistant announced a new hire. A young manager walked in, clutching a laptop and looking incredibly nervous. He reminded me exactly of myself 30 years ago, full of ideas but terrified of the politics. He started talking about a new algorithm he had developed, his eyes lighting up with passion. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old coldness. I realized I had a choice to make. I could be the monster who took his ideas to protect my own seat, or I could be the mentor I never had. I looked at the logic bomb code I kept framed on my wall as a reminder. I stood up, walked around my desk, and shook his hand. "This is brilliant work," I said. "Let's make sure your name is the only one on the patent." A few weeks into my new role on the board, I was performing a routine security sweep of the legacy servers. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed a strange, rhythmic pulsing in the data traffic. It wasn't my code. I realized with a jolt that there was a second logic bomb buried even deeper than mine, one I hadn't written. I traced the digital signature back through months of encrypted logs. The logic was clever, feminine, and vengeful. It was Sarah's work. She wasn't just a pretty face or a distracted mistress. She was a brilliant coder who had been hiding her light to keep Julian's ego satisfied. She had planted a kill switch that would wipe the company's financial history if she was ever removed from the payroll. She was much smarter than Julian, and even me, had ever realized. Subscribe for more revenge stories to see how Rose handles this final threat. I didn't call the police. Instead, I sent a private car to pick up Sarah from the low-rent diner where she was now working as a waitress. We sat in a back booth, the smell of grease and cheap coffee between us. She looked exhausted, but her eyes sharpened when I opened my laptop.
"I found your gift, Sarah," I said quietly.
She didn't flinch. She wanted $1 million to disarm the bomb, or she would let the company's history burn to the ground. I almost admired her nerve. I turned the screen toward her and showed her a new string of code. While you were working, I was rewriting, I told her. I had already diverted her kill switch to a private server that benefited me. I gave her a choice. She could go to jail for cyberterrorism, or she could take a quiet settlement and move away forever. Sarah took the settlement and disappeared into the night, leaving me as the sole guardian of the system. I went back to the office late that evening, the building empty and silent. I sat at my desk and opened the master directory. One by one, I began to delete the hidden backdoors, the traps, and the secret triggers I had built. I wanted to run a clean company, free from the ghosts of revenge and the weight of old grudges. As I hit the final delete key, a courier arrived at my door with a small, heavy package. There was no return address, just a congratulations note written in familiar, shaky handwriting. I opened it to find a vintage gold watch, the one Julian used to wear every day to show off his status. It was a trophy from a fallen king, sent from a place of total defeat. I used the wealth I had gained to do something Julian never would have imagined. I founded a coding school specifically for underprivileged kids and older workers who had been pushed out of their industries. I wanted to give people the tools to defend themselves against the Julians of the world. One afternoon, while I was reviewing the new scholarship applications, I saw a familiar name on the list. It was Julian's secret son, Marcus. He had lost everything when his father was arrested, and he was working 2 jobs just to survive. He didn't ask for a handout, he just wanted to learn how to build things the right way. I looked at his application for a long time. I realized that the best revenge wasn't just destroying my enemies, it was proving that I was nothing like them. I picked up my pen and approved his scholarship. Today, I sit in the corner office on the top floor, the same one Julian once used to mock my dreams. The view of the city is beautiful, but I don't spend much time looking at the skyline. I spend my time looking at the code on my screen. It is simple, elegant, and above all, honest. There are no bombs hidden in the math anymore, and no lies buried in the files. I am Rose, the woman they tried to erase, and I am still standing. I learned that logic is a cold, hard tool, and if you misuse it, it will eventually turn on you. Julian thought he was a master of the world, but he forgot that the world is built on the backs of people like me. I closed my laptop and smiled, thinking of my final lesson. Logic is cold, Julian.
But revenge?
Revenge is a perfect calculation.
Thank you.
Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also turn on your notification bell so you be the first to get our next shocking revenge story.